Olá, como vai você? Tudo bem? É um prazer imenso recebê-lo no nosso canal, o canal do nosso grupo de pesquisa, o grupo de estudos críticos e avançados em linguagem. Meu nome é Kleber Aparecida Silva, eu sou professor da Universidade de Brasília e pesquisador do CNPq. E é com imenso prazer hoje que a gente vai organizar nosso 35º colóquio de educação crítica, né? Alicerçado justamente no pensar, no repensar de uma formação engajada e crítica. Sejam muitos bem-vindos, muito bem-vindas. É um prazer recebê-las em nossa casa, na Universidade de Brasília. E hoje nós teremos a oportunidade singular de interagir e aprender com duas grandes pesquisadoras, a professora Ryuko Kubota, da Universidade da British Columbia University, no Canadá, e a minha querida amiga Suhantie Motha, a Su, que é da Universidade de Washington. E elas são autoras de um livro que foi base da nossa discussão no nosso grupo de pesquisa, discutindo um pouquinho sobre raça, racismo e decolonialidade. Sem mais delongas, eu gostaria de convidar o nosso grande amigo, professor Avram, que é professor da Universidade de Brasília, que irá mediar esse diálogo com as nossas duas ilustres convidadas. Avram, em nome do nosso grupo de pesquisa, eu queria te saudar, seja muito bem-vindo. Eu tenho certeza que a sua mediação irá tornar esse colóquio muito agradável para todos nós. Seja muito bem-vindo, Avram.
Thank you so much. Muito obrigado. I'm going to transition to English now. I hope everybody's ready.
Yeah.
And so Dr. Motha and Dr. Kubota will understand. So Kleber, I'm going to present my slides with a little information about the two invited speakers today. Is that right? Let me see if it works.
That's it.
Okay. 1 second. There it is. Okay, great. Whoops. Well, it went to the end. Go back to the beginning. All right. So the name of the title of today's talk is Race, Racism, and Anti-Racism in Language Teaching. As Professor Kleber mentioned, our invited speakers are Ryuko Kubota, and I already see a typo here. I'm sorry, it's R-Y-U-K-O, not R-Y-O-K-O, and Dr. Suhantie Motha. I'd like to share a little bit about my personal experience with the two authors. And I have direct experience with Dr. Motha. She was my advisor for my master's thesis at the University of Washington from 2008 to 2010. And she introduced me to the work and the ideas of critical multiculturalism from Dr. Kubota. And I can say that those ideas, as well as Dr. Motha's interpretation of them, has had a profound effect on who I am, how I am, and who I want to become. Trying to be, oh, by the way, I'm a professor of English at UNIB. I do research related to race and racism and anti-racism. And I'm also involved in outreach projects and in administrative projects. So I'll talk a little bit about our two invited speakers briefly, and I'm going to try to read off the screen, but now I see that it's very small. So first of all, Dr. Kubota is a professor in the Department of Language and Literacy Education at the University of British Columbia, UBC, where she specializes in critical applied linguistics, race and anti-racism, language ideologies, and justice-oriented language pedagogy. Her widely cited works include Race, Culture, and Identities in Second Language Education, Exploring Critically Engaged Practice, which she co-edited in 2009, and Discourses of Identity, Language Learning, Teaching, and Reclamation Perspectives in Japan, which was co-edited in 2023, with a forthcoming volume titled Race, Racism, and Anti-Racism in Education. In recent articles, she interrogates paradigms such as world Englishes, translanguaging, and neoliberal multiculturalism, advocating for anti-racist, multilingual, and praxis-oriented approaches that attend to the lived experiences of racially minoritized language users, which reminds me, I mentioned multiculturalism, and I don't remember now if I emphasized critical multiculturalism instead of neoliberal multiculturalism in my introduction to the work of Dr. Kubota. I'm not going to read the last line, actually, because it's covered by the my indicator of the current slide. So I'm going to also introduce at this time Dr. Motha. Suhantie Motha is an associate professor in the Department of English at the University of Washington, where she works in the areas of applied linguistics, English language teaching, and critical language studies. Her research explores how language education is intertwined with race, colonialism, and power, with a focus on pedagogical practices that foster social justice. She is the author of Race, Empire, and English Language Teaching, Creating Responsible and Ethical Anti-Racist Practice, which was published through Teachers College Press, which is a landmark work in critical language education. And again, there's something on my screen that covers the last line of her introduction, so I'm going to skip it, but present to you all a few titles of their most cited articles specifically. So the first one by Kubota is Japanese Culture Constructed by Discourses, Implications for Applied Linguistics, Research, and ELT. I'm not going to continue reading about it, but I would just emphasize that Dr. Kubota's work, this is from 1999, and already she was looking at issues of how dichotomies of East and West and stereotyping and pushing back on racializations and especially inequalities in race relations within the field of additional language teaching, education. Another widely cited article of hers is The Multi-Plural Turn, Post-Colonial Theory and Neoliberal Multiculturalism, Complicities and Implications for Applied Linguistics. And in this one, it's interesting how she offers a criticism of neoliberal multiculturalism in the field. It's a common thread in much of her work. One of Professor Motha's most widely cited articles is Racializing ESL Teacher Identities in the US K-12 Public Schools, which is based on her doctoral research and deals with racialized identities and the prevalence of underlying white supremacy within our understanding of race and language users in public schools and beyond. And another is Non-Coercive Rearrangements, Theorizing Desire in TESOL, published in 2014. And it brings to the fore this idea of desire and how if we desire a language, an additional language, what that implies and what is embedded in that. And encourages us to think more about that. And but I have a more personal relationship with articles by each of our invited speakers today. I had the opportunity to collaborate with Dr. Rosane Rocha Pessoa at the Federal University of Goiás in 2022. We co-facilitated a class on language teacher education, and Dr. Pessoa invited me to work specifically with the topic of race and racism and within the field of language education. And I chose two articles. Just so happens that the two are by our two invited speakers today. The first was Confronting Epistemological Racism, Decolonizing Scholarly Knowledge, Race and Gender in Applied Linguistics by Dr. Kubota. And it's a very, an article that helps my comprehension of the world around me by discussing racism on different levels, which I know in Brazil we do quite a bit. We have different theorists who do so also. In this case, Dr. Kubota focuses on individual race, the difference between individual racism institutional racism and epistemological racism. And throughout her work, she points out to us that just focusing on racism on an individual level, we are often still perpetuating racism if we don't confront inequalities on an institutional and epistemological level. And the other article that we read for that seminar by Dr. Motha was, "Is an anti-racist and decolonizing applied linguistics possible?" It's a short article, but very rich. And she talks about how the foundations of science and applied linguistics, as many of us know it, is based on white supremacist values. And she argues that that an anti-racist and decolonizing applied linguistics is possible, but we must be constantly asking ourselves, is what I'm doing racist or anti-racist? And avoid the idea of like not racist. Either we're practicing racism or anti-racism, but if we try to pretend that we're not racist, then we're actually perpetuating racism. With that, I believe that's my last slide for now. So I would like to pass the ball, so to speak, to Dr. Kubota and Dr. Motha. And I apologize if I spoke too much. By the way, if you want to ask questions in the chat, I will copy and paste them so that we can present them to our invited speakers later. E se vocês querem também teclar em português, as perguntas no chat, aí eu posso copiar, colar e traduzir. So I'd like to, as I said, pass the ball. And meanwhile, I think you can hear the birds singing behind me. Welcome, Dr. Motha. Welcome, Dr. Kubota. It's an honor to have you here with us today. Thank you so much. By the way, audience, Dr. Kubota is currently in Japan where it's 2 a.m. So she woke up in the middle of the night to be here, and we are very grateful. Thank you so much.
We're so grateful to be here, both of us, and I'm especially grateful to Ryuko for getting up at this hour. Obrigado. Thank you so much for inviting us. We're honored to be here and to be in conversation with you. Thank you, Avram, for your kind words and your lovely introduction. We were just commenting ahead of time that Avram was in my classes when I first started my first position. I was, as we say, I was a baby professor, and I felt so lucky to have the cohort that I was working with that year. It was 2008, and they were the loveliest people, especially Avram, and it really made my entry into the academy and into that position a lovely one. And thank you to Kleber, who visited the Seattle and the University of Washington and really changed the way that we talk about anti-Blackness here. I think you heightened the awareness of all of us, the faculty, the grad students, our Humanities Center. It was a really important visit. He hung out with us for a few days, and it was really, I think, epistemologically changing for so many of us. So thank you. And thank you to Simone behind the scenes, who we haven't seen your face yet, but I know you're doing so much. So thank you. And Ryuko, I'll leave you to.
Okay. Muito obrigada pelo convite. And I'm sorry I'm not awake 100%. I don't know if it's bom dia or boa tarde or boa noite. Probably boa noite in my part. But anyway, thank you very much for inviting, and I'm honored to be here. And because of my condition, I might not be coherent, but I will do my best.
I'll just say that in the no matter what Ryuko's condition, she's amazingly brilliant, even in the worst condition possible. So I feel very lucky that she's here. I'm going to go ahead and share my slides. Is that okay? Okay. Okay. Can you see my slides? I can't see anyone now. So
yes, we can see them. Mm-hmm.
That is so exciting. Okay.
It's a great step.
We're using a platform I've never used before. Okay, so I know that land acknowledgements aren't practiced across the globe, but in our two contexts, in the United States and in Canada, they are practiced, but they're somewhat controversial. And I personally am actually somewhat conflicted about the practice, but I have noticed that when I open meetings and when I open my classes with a land acknowledgement, and then I sort of put the thought into connecting the content of the gathering or the content of the class, making that connection to indigeneity, it makes my practice better. So I'm sort of leaning on the side of continuing to use land acknowledgements, and for that reason, I've put them on the slide, and we'll go ahead and offer our institutional land acknowledgements, and then I'll connect them to the content of this session. Ryuko, would you like to start with UBCs?
Sure. So the University of British Columbia in Canada sits on the unceded territory of, actually, University of British Columbia is in Vancouver, the city of Vancouver, which sits on the traditional and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, including the territories of Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. So Vancouver, UBC Vancouver campus is situated in the Musqueam nation, and I'm very grateful to be here.
And the University of Washington acknowledges the Coast Salish people of the land that I'm on right now, the land which touches the shared waters of all tribes and bands within the Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. And so it's important that we remember that we're on stolen land as we have this conversation, as we consider our role in the promotion of English and other languages, because the establishment of these languages and the dominance of these languages play a really important role in the violence of settler colonialism. And they're therefore inextricably entangled with histories such as land theft and genocide and enslavement. So I feel it's important to sort of never forget that, and to try to be conscious of how we can do least harm as we're teaching language. So we're going to start out, our plan for today is we had the introduction, and we're going to start out talking about who we are and who you are. So we'll talk about that in a minute. We'll talk about the dominant language ideologies in your context. And we had talked about doing breakout rooms, but I think when, in the interest of time, we might not do that. We'll just have us think about those questions. And then we'll tell you about our latest book project that we edited together, the book Race, Racism, and Antiracism in Language Education, which involved 10 different projects. And we'll tell you a little bit about each project very briefly, but in particular, we'll highlight the questions that came out of those projects and think about how you might apply those questions to your own educational contexts. And we're hoping to end with some space to consider possibilities for anti-racist practice in your own context. Okay, so we'll start with our lives, and there's a very particular reason for doing that. We're starting with, Ryoko's life and my life, and then each of your lives. And we're doing this because we believe that who we are as teachers and even who we are as language users can't be separated from who we are as people. In the language classroom, our linguistic identities and our racial identities are an integral part of our teaching identities. So that's our point of departure today. It's also an integral part of our practice as anti-racist and anti-colonial scholars. Knowledge-making practices during colonization shifted to privilege what were considered more rational ways of thinking, which included those that were devoid of relationality and life experiences and more disconnected epistemologies. And so in locating knowledge making in our own and our students' experiences, we're seeking to make a kind of decolonial move. So Ryuko and I are going to tell you a little bit about ourselves, and our histories have shaped who we are as researchers and teachers, and particularly our racial and linguistic histories. So I grew up and entered the profession in the United States. I didn't realize it for a long time, but my teaching practice has definitely been shaped by my racial and language history. I was born in Sri Lanka and I left as an infant, although I visit often. And then I grew up in Australia and in New Caledonia, which is a small island in the South Pacific, which it's a territory of France. And in Canberra, Australia, almost everyone I knew was white, other than my family. But nobody talked about the fact that we looked different. It's kind of strange. And the fact that I spoke English like an Australian, it gave me a way to assert belonging. And as I grew up and entered the profession in the United States as a brown woman, practicing within this profession that's kind of predicated on this interweaving of English and whiteness, I caught myself, especially in my early days, spending time seeking to establish legitimacy as a speaker and a teacher. I remember once, a long time ago, it was in the 90s, before I had started really thinking through these questions, a student questioning my pronunciation of something. I thought he was asking me because of my race. And I sought legitimacy by explaining, this is how it's pronounced in the UK. It was the word tomato. And the reason I remember it is because I wrote the story down. I think I probably would have forgotten it otherwise. But knowing that kind of impresses on me all the different ways we're shaped by our histories and our ancestors, and the ways we can choose to reinforce racism or reject it. And, I remember that and regret that moment and feel that I want to learn from it. Ryuko?
Yes, so who I am. So I think I'm going to draw on what I wrote a couple of weeks ago. I'm co-authoring with Shirley Chow, who is associate professor at University of British Columbia, Okanagan. We have two campuses, Vancouver and Okanagan, and she's in social work. And we were involved in the President Task Force on Antiracism and Inclusive Excellence about 5 years ago, under the leadership of President Santa Ono at UBC. We were asked to write our experiences working on this anti-racist and Antiracism and Inclusive Excellence President Task Force. So I'm going to kind of draw on this. So I was born and raised in Japan as the only child in the middle-class family. So my primary, secondary, and graduate education in the 1960s and 70s shaped the foundation of my later career as educator. After graduating from a private university in Tokyo, I returned to my home prefecture to teach English as a foreign language at a public school for 3 years. My cross-Pacific travels for graduate study and work began shortly after that. I obtained a master's degree in the States and PhD from Canada in 1992, which is a long time ago. This was followed by my career as a faculty member in higher education in California for 3 years and in North Carolina for almost 14 years. So UBC Vancouver became my third employer in higher education. I arrived in Vancouver in January 2009 as a full professor. Reflecting on my almost 40 years of studying and working as Asian woman settler in North America, becoming more scholarly established has not entirely protected me from racism, sexism, and linguicism. Many people in the field of language education and applied linguistics would view me as a successful scholar with competitive publication and citation records and a rank of full professor in research-intensive university. I have served as a president of 2 professional associations, and yet I have been a target of racism throughout my career in North America. Let's see, I'm going to just skip. And in my second workplace, a major research university in the United States, I worked hard to establish my scholarly record as a critical scholar in applied linguistics and language studies, language education, and I have become research on race and racism in language education. Yet, I encountered many incidents of microaggressions, including hurtful comments from my white colleagues and leaders, as I described in my publications. Since I moved to UBC, the situation has become relatively easy, perhaps because I have already been tenured full professor. Nonetheless, I have faced many microaggressions and pushbacks from multiple directions, from colleagues, from students, and a leader. I have suffered from bullying, and my dedicated work for my department has been undermined. Outside of my workplace, racist incidents have also happened at academic conference. For instance, after my invited talk on the interface between race and language at a recent conference on English language education in Hong Kong, so this happened about a month ago, a white American man approached me after my presentation and after I talked to other people who gathered me after the presentation and blamed me for not having mentioned reverse racism of which he was a victim. And to judge if what experience is caused by racism and sexism, I used the mental litmus test, so to speak, to see if the same thing happens if I were a white woman or an Asian man or a native speaker of English. So these experiences remind me that I'm perpetually a target of racism against East Asian women, no matter how much I build my professional career. So it's lifelong struggle. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryuko. So, so you've heard from, we've talked about that incident for our group of women, the sister scholars have been talking about that incident. It's so surprising that these things are still, are still happening. It was an incident like that brought us together 25 years ago, and we're still having the same conversations. So we've shared our experiences, our life histories, and how they've shaped who we are as teaching professionals, as language professionals, with you. And maybe we'll say we're going to give you. We had talked about maybe 10 minutes. What does everybody think? If I move over to the screen, can you still see me? Avram, can you see us? And can you see the screen?
Uh-huh.
What are you seeing, Avram?
Who are you? How has your language teaching practice been shaped by your linguistic and racial biographies?
Okay, great. And are you seeing us also?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Okay, perfect. All right. I apologize for my unfamiliarity with the way the screens are working. Okay, so so what do you think, is 10 minutes good? 10 minutes for a free write? I also don't have a good sense of how many people are around. We had talked about doing breakout rooms, but I think that it might be unwieldy with the software.
Simone, can we ask for your opinion? What do you think? How much time? I think 10 minutes is going to be fine.
Oh, Simone.
Oh, never mind. Nope. Sorry. Simone says no. Simone, do you think 5 minutes is okay? Okay. I think she says we should just reflect a little bit about it, but maybe not take time away from the presentation.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay, so just I'll just say, 5 minutes is okay. I'm seeing her saying 5 minutes is okay, Avram, right?
Woohoo!
I think
Okay.
I
yes, yeah, I see it too.
Okay, Simone, thank you. Okay, so let's just think about it for a minute. Think about your history. Think about not just your personal history, but also your your family history, your ancestors. Think about your language, your heritage languages, and think about how your language teaching practice has been shaped by your linguistic and racial biographies. And maybe take some notes. And we'll just give you a few minutes. Okay, maybe just a few more seconds. Okay. And maybe I hope that you'll have a chance to have a conversation with others about this. I always find I am better able to think if I talk aloud with other people. Okay. Now, why are we not advancing? Maybe I have to go to the other slides. Ryuko and I have been working together on this book, Race, Racism, and Anti-Racism in Language Education. And there's a quote on the first page that I pulled out because I think it really gets at the crux of why we felt the need to assemble this book. It is not enough for language educators to merely understand that language teaching and racism are somehow interconnected, and that language practices exist in power relationships and within histories of inequality with others. Rather, in order to be effective teachers, language educators need to be supported in developing an explicit, critical analysis of how racism develops and is allowed to survive in language teaching contexts. In addition, and just as importantly, they must be equipped with tools and skills for disrupting the functioning of racism in language teaching when they recognize its presence. I think we were seeing that we had gotten to the point that racism was becoming visible, and we were seeing teachers, and we ourselves were asking about revolution. Like, what do you do? What do you do at this point? And how do you resist? And so this book came about, and we're going to tell you a little bit about it and try to offer some scaffolding in the form of questions as we do. So Ryoko's going to tell you a little bit of historical background to the book.
Sorry. So this book was developed based on some needs, and also the previous book was edited by myself and Angel Lin and published in 2009. And we wanted to have an update version of it. And so we invited authors from around the world because issues of anti-racism in language education has been discussed in globally. About 10, 15 years ago, it just started out in North America, but a lot of teachers and teacher educators and researchers are engaging in anti-racism worldwide. So we invited global scholars, and so I'm going to first talk about development of this research domain, and then emerging research topics in recent literature, things that recent literature focus on in terms of the discussion of anti-racism and language education, and then future directions. And then Sue is going to take over the summaries of book chapters. So next slide, please. Okay, so I need to take a, okay. So first, development of the works in racialization and anti-racism in language education. So believe it or not, the topic has been addressed for quite a long time. So the first, one of the first publications was by Nuzhat Amin, who did her dissertation at University of Toronto. She's originally from Bangladesh, and she was interested in her own experience as an English teacher. And also she was interested in racialized English teachers' experiences. So she conducted interviews with them, and she focused on their experiences of working with the students. And students are international students, maybe some domestic students at the time. But Nuzhat asked the participants what they experience with the students, so what students say to them, so to speak, right? So I'm quoting here from her work. So, quote, the teachers believe that some ESL students make the following assumptions. A, only white people can be native speakers of English. B, only native speakers know real, proper Canadian English. And C, only white people are real Canadians. My participants, that is teachers, said that they felt disempowered by the student stereotype of an authentic ESL teacher. So this was published in 1997, which is almost how many years ago? 30 years ago, right? And the same problem still persists. Another study is by Awad Ibrahim, 1999 in TESOL Quarterly, and he conducted ethnography of French-speaking African refugee background youth in Canada who learned to use Black English and became Black, right? Because these African refugee background immigrant youth, they're Black, but they're not North American Black English speakers. So they learned North American Black English as represented in, for example, hip hop. And then they became Black. So that's very unique ethnographic study. And then myself, in 2001, this was a response article to someone else's response to my article. Okay, in this work, I looked at the image of American classrooms. So American classrooms are typically described as more active. Students are active and they engage in discussion and more critical, right? Teachers and students debate and discuss critical questions and so forth. But I reviewed some literature and many of the studies actually do raise problems of American classrooms at that time. So this was, these studies were in the 1990s. And then typically the positive image of American classrooms are contrasted by Asian classrooms, which are portrayed as passive. The teachers are more, the didactic stage of teaching and so forth. And all these images are constructed by discourses of Orientalism, cultural essentialism, and so forth. And reader responded to my articles. Oh, and then I said this cultural essentialism has to do with racial biases, right? It comes from colonial dichotomy of language and culture, and colonialism has underpinnings of racism. And then one of the readers reacted, does this mean that all applied linguists are racist? So that comment triggered me to delve more into issues of racism. So I realized that this person interpret racism only as individual racism, right? Interpersonal racism. So I talked about institutional racism and epistemological racism. So this was back in 2001. And then, as I mentioned, Enjang Lin and I co-edited a special issue in TESOL Quarterly in 2006 and 2009. We published a book. And then, of course, our Motha have published works in TESOL Quarterly and monograph about how U.S. teachers, racialized and white teachers, female teachers, engage with issues of race, racialization, and racism in the classroom, primary and secondary classrooms in the United States, and how these experiences are shaped by racist practices of colonial expansion, especially European imperialism, white supremacy, settler colonialism, and slavery. And more recently, race and race, anti-racism has discussed in teaching English, teaching languages other than English, including French, German, Spanish, Chinese, Japanese, Portuguese in Uju Ane's study on U.S. Undergraduate students of Portuguese traveling to Salvador, Brazil, to learn Portuguese, but then they sort of define their self-identity as Black because they are immersed in Black-dominant Portuguese city, and they learned new cultural nuances and linguistic interactions. Racial bias related to language has also been studied since the 1990s through experimental research, quantitative research. So studies have consistently revealed listener perceptions and biases of accentedness triggered by visual cues that signal speakers' racial background, like being Asian, being Black, and so forth, as seen in the seminal work by Donald Rubin and Oh Kim Kang and Donald Rubin, 2009, which gave the name of this phenomenon reverse linguistic stereotyping, which resonates with Nelson Flores and Jonathan Rosa's notion, racial linguistic ideologies. Okay, so emerging topics. So in doing our in our book project, we identified emerging topics. So First one is a decolonial perspective. So this has been more and more studies and works within anti-racism and language education that focus on decolonial perspectives. So this is a connection between coloniality or the effects of colonialism, language and race, as well as decolonial imperatives. And I am going to, and this is very interesting. I am going to, I think this is informal presentation, so we can sort of derail and talk about something slightly different. I hope that's okay. It's okay, right, Sue?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
I mean,
So I am going to Manaus actually in about 1 week, and for International Japanese Studies Conference. And this is my first time in Amazon, and I'm still working on my slides. But then several days ago, I came across this reference, actually, and I have to take a look at. So this reference is by Sydney Shulu, and the title is Japanese Migration to Brazil in the Age of Empires. And sorry, the primary title is Collaborative Settler Colonialism, Japanese Migration to Brazil in the Age of Empires. So this is, he's a historian, and he looks at the Japanese settler colonial expansion to Brazil, and also Japanese imperial expansion to Asia during wartime. So this is really fascinating study, and so there's the strong colonialism of Brazil, and also Japanese immigration to Brazil. And of course, I'm going to Japanese Studies Conference, and Japanese language teachers are, presenting their studies. But this book reminded me that there's a very deep-rooted connection between settler colonialism and migration, immigration, and the preservation of language and culture. So the first point by Shuru is collaborative settler colonialism. So according to him, so both Brazil and Japan established settler colonialism collaboratively. So the first point is that the Japan who emigrated Japanese farmers mostly to Brazil promoted settler colonialism, and at the same time, Brazil promoted settler colonialism. They collaborated, right? So there was in the background the racist theory of a racial reformation based on social Darwinism, because at that time in 19th century there was strong belief that the Caucasian people occupy the top of the hierarchy, racial hierarchy, whereas Black people and indigenous people occupy the bottom. And in between, there's yellow people, Asian people, and others, right? So it's interesting that in Japan, that type of racial hierarchy was discussed as academic theory, and then they believe that indigenous people in the north, there's indigenous people in the north and in the south in Japan. So Ainu people in the north were viewed as savage, and they the Japanese government dispossessed their land, and there was settler moving into Hokkaido, that island, and also in Brazil, in the 19th century and 20th centuries, they accepted a lot of immigrants as plantation workers, laborers, as the economic expansion. And according to this, in 1890 to 1919, there were 2.6 million immigrants to Brazil. And according to the author, there was a Roosevelt random scientific expedition of the Amazon, which is a collaboration between a Brazilian government and the US government. So the purpose was to civilize the indigenous people in the Amazon. And then around that time, whitening the population was promoted based on the social Darwinism. So, like, mixed race, interrace marriages were promoted to improve the race of the Brazilians. And at the time, Japanese were not considered as a superior race in Brazil. However, after the victory of Sino-Japan and Sino-Russo-Japan War, Brazilian government and the Brazilian elitist group reconsidered the inferiority of Japanese race, and Japan can become the project of whitening the Brazilian people. So that's interesting to read all the history of the collaborative settler colonialism between Japan and Brazil, and of course, Japanese settlers dispossessed indigenous land and farmed the land and became more economically successful. And it's interesting, in the popular discourse, academic discourse, in immigration studies in Japan and maybe Brazil, Japanese immigrants are portrayed as successful minority or model minority, right? But so they sort of overcome racism in Brazil, and they became successful. But however, they stole the land of the indigenous people, and they became successful. And that experience was actually used as a rationale for the Japanese Imperial Japan to expand their territory to Asian nations, East Asia and Southeast Asia and South Pacific imperialism in Japan. So there's a very strong connection between settler colonialism in Brazil and imperial expansion in Japan, in elsewhere. Okay, so this is a little bit of addition that I'm learning right now. Okay, so then the second issue was intersectionality that we noticed in our literature review. So intersectionality, we already know it's the entanglement of race, language, gender, class, sexuality, religion, disability, and so forth, which form oppressive experiences of minoritized people. And in the study of language and race, intersectionality has been increasingly addressed. And the third topic is anti-Black racism. So there has been increased interest in anti-Black racism, unique challenges faced by Black, especially women, language teachers and learners. I mentioned Uju Anya's study in Salvador, Brazil, about Black students' experiences of learning Portuguese as foreign language during study abroad. And of course, in Brazil, the Black slavery and its aftermath has created anti-Black racism in Brazil. So in one of the chapters, we have Aparecida's chapter on that. And the fourth theme is capitalism. It's a relationship between linguistic normatism, racism, neoliberalism, and capitalist values as manifested in bilingual education in the US and other parts of the world. So bilingual education, particularly in the US, is known for dual language two-way immersion program, where you have linguistic minority students, typically Spanish-speaking students, and linguistically majority students, typically native speakers of English. They work together in one classroom in two languages, Spanish and English, right? However, there has been a strong economic impetus for being in this dual language two-way immersion program among middle-class white parents, because they consider bilingualism as a strong element, strong booster for economic success in the future for their children. So a lot of white parents send their students to this dual language two-way immersion program. So there's this capitalist neoliberal influence in the bilingual program, and of course that influences the racial makeup of the program and racial linguistic reality of what's happening in the classroom. And also the fifth one is multilingual focus. We have seen more interest in questioning linguistic and racial linguistic norms and homogeneity, translanguaging, and so forth in languages other than English. And moving on to the future directions, we need to further examine issues of race in teaching and language, teaching and learning multiple languages and multiple geographical contexts, not just North America or South America, and outside of Americas. We need to look at what's happening there in terms of the issues of anti-racist education. And second, we need to pluralize the concept of race and racism. We have been interpreting the concept of race and racism and anti-racism in North American context, but these concepts are not universal. They're different in different parts of the world. For example, in China, the term race is rarely used. There they use ethnicity, right? And ethnic groups. And the official discourse that the communist China has overcome racism, and racism is a problem of Western nations, which doesn't mean that the racism doesn't exist, but because of this politics of talking about race and racialized groups are very, very different. So we should take a look at different parts of the world, different ways of understanding race and racism. Okay, lastly, we need to critically examine the meaning of anti-racism in global context. Again, this is something that we need to increasingly do because of the diverse understanding of racism, and also diverse geographical politics and contexts where there are different racialized groups exist side by side, either peacefully or in conflict. And we need to continue to study issues of race and racism in global context. So thank you. Please move on.
Thank you, Ryuko. Okay, I just want to do a time check because I think that we end at 3:30, which is in 14 minutes. So if I can just do a time check, sorry, Simone, that we keep asking about this time issue. In which case, I will condense the summaries. Maybe I will just read titles and then important questions or something like that. I'm wondering how much time we want to leave for discussion if we just have 14 minutes left. Avram, you want to? And you may be on mute, Avram. You may still be on mute. We have 10 minutes left. Is that right? Okay, I'm going to do this. I'm just going to read the titles and throw out a question. Is that good? And yeah, I'm going to do that, and then you can stop me if you'd like me to. Stop me if you've heard this one before. Okay, so the first chapter is by Patricia Baquedano Lopez. It's wonderful. Oh, I want to tell you more about each of these. It's Indigenous language revalorization. Notice she uses the word revalorization instead of revitalization. I want to tell you about that, but I won't. The subtitle.
Sue?
Yes.
Can you move the slide to the next page?
Thanks, Ryuko. The subtitle is Disrupting Logics of Racial Erasure. And the question I was going to ask you to think about was, think about the relationships among indigeneity, race, language, and English in your teaching and learning contexts. Are there any challenges or stories that come to mind as I read the summary, which you're not actually hearing? The next one is Racism is the Origin of Colonial Difference in Mexico, Pre-Service Language Teachers' Insights by Vilma Huerta Cordova, Mario Lopez Gopa, and Bill Sugruja. And the question I had was very specific. The chapter describes very specific types of racial discrimination experienced by Indigenous people. And the chapter is really asking you to think about the unique challenges in educational programs that Indigenous students face and what we as teachers can do to eradicate anti-Indigenous racism. The next chapter is by Pinky McCoe and Carolyn McKinney. It's called Racializing Ideologies of Language in Post-Apartheid Schooling. And a quote from that chapter that really hit me was made by a principal who said about his students who spoke Isi Xhosa as a home language, they come here with no language. So kind of erasing the home language of students. And so that's in a South African setting. Think about your own setting. What are language hierarchies in your educational context? Like how are languages shaped and then put into order of importance or prestige? How do they map onto race? And what about bilingualism and multilingualism? How are they constructed in your context? It was like, in this context, it was like you couldn't actually be bilingual. It was a way of saying if you didn't speak English, then you just were nothing. You had no language. Okay, the next one is by Uju Anya, who you've heard us talk about a little bit, Examining Materials and Instruction in the Practice of Critical Race Pedagogy for World Language Teaching. That chapter is really good. She has a really good summary of critical race theory, and it's very applicable. She tells you how to apply it to your classroom. So
Sue,
yes.
Can you move to the next page?
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Thank you so much. I do this when I'm teaching too. Think about the language instructional materials you use. Are they assigned to you, or do you have some freedom in choosing the materials you use? How could they be improved upon in relation to racism and anti-Blackness? That chapter's really good if you want to do a sort of analysis of your materials. Okay, the next one is Moving Beyond Erasure of Race in French Second Language Education by Maika Wernicke, Mimi Masson, Marika Kunas, and Shalina Adatia. And the question I was going to ask you to think about is consider your conceptualization of language. That was actually a question that came out of their chapter. Does your conceptualization of language allow for a meaningful engagement with the social and institutional aspects of language learning and teaching, and therefore language learners' racialized identities? Chapter 6 is called In Search of Solidarity, Black American Students in China by Wenhao Tiao. And that question is, to what extent are the concepts of desire, like language desire, motivation and attitude helpful or unhelpful in explaining the experiences of learners who are experiencing racism?
Next page.
Thank you. You may all know Aparecida de Jesus Ferreira, Epistemologies of Critical Race Literacy in the Brazilian Context and Intersectionality of Foreign Language Teachers' Identities, which is, again, a really user-friendly chapter about critical racial literacy. And my question is, how did your teacher education courses prepare you to negotiate issues of race, gender, and social class in your own and in your students' lives? Chapter 8 is by Ushri Bhattacharya, SEME, Disability, Race, and Language Education. And my question is, how are individuals with disabilities represented in your language learning materials and curriculum? Chapter 9 is Reverse Linguistic Stereotyping and Social Judgment of Accented Speech, a case study about ratiolinguistic phenomena by Okim Kang and Catherine Yaw. And my question for you is, how does linguistic stereotyping impact our professional practice? And the last chapter is by Ashley Moore, The Challenge and Promise of Thinking Intersectionally About Sexuality, Gender, Race, and Nationality in Language Education. It's such a complex chapter. You could spend hours thinking about the questions it raises, but I'll give you just one. Many language classrooms are experienced to be heteronormative. Have you ever participated in a language classroom that incorporated queer people in their lives in affirming ways? And what did that look like? And then I'll just read you the questions we were going to have for breakout rooms, but we don't have time for breakout rooms. What possibilities exist for anti-racist practice in your context? And what do you need to make these happen? Do you need collaboration? Do you need supportive leadership? Do you need like-minded colleagues? Are there specific resources that would be helpful? Do you need communities of support? Do you need curricular changes? And then I was actually hoping that we could brainstorm together and think about how to make that happen. And here are our email addresses. And again, I want to say a big obrigado for having us. We're really grateful to you. You may be on mute again, Avram. Ryuko, do you hear him? No, nor do I.
Avram, are you mute? Yeah. Well, I believe that if you disconnect it and connect again, probably we'll solve this problem. What are you thinking about it? Yes?
I think he tried that a couple of times. I'm just thinking that the word mute is a very ableist term. Maybe we should be coming up with better language for that. Oh, but And do without Avram.
Well, just wait some minutes. I believe that he will come. But I can interact with you, Sue and Kubota. First of all, it's an honor for us, to learn with you. Your conference, your talk was so great. I'm so happy because you have the opportunity to read your book, and after you have the opportunity to interact with you. Kubota inspired me in Brazil, and Suhantie Motha inspired me. Like critical applied linguistics educator in Brazil. Now, I'd like to listen to you more about because especially in the global south, it's so common to have some war or with racism. It is so common to many people to use some word to characterize our communities, like a black communities in Brazil. I'd like to listen to you more about your experience, your conception about this, how to deal with these conflicts, the prejudice in the global south, how to valorize the black communities in Brazil in the global south. Can you talk more about this? What do you think about this? Avram?
I'm back.
Yeah, yeah.
We can
So, Clever, were you asking me a question?
I asked you to Sue and Kubota.
Okay.
Yeah, but I'd like to listen you, of course, that.
Could you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Well, my question is this. It's so common, especially we like research in the global south, to defend a conception of the critical applied linguistics that's so important to defend black communities. Black communities, it is to have, for example, to dismiss the prejudice and so on. But how to do this, especially in the global south? How to decolonize the racist minds that many people have in our countries? The antiracism language education is the one way to deal with this or not? What are you thinking about it? It's okay for you. My question.
I mean, my first thought is that it's very complicated for scholars who are practicing elsewhere to try to weigh in on things that are happening, out of their context, and particularly scholars who are located in in North America, to be trying to apply the knowledge that they're cultivating in their own location to what is happening in, say, Brazil, or in any other context. But there are many people who are studying anti-Blackness in the global South. So, I mean, my first thought is looking at, for instance, we talked about Aparecida's work in classrooms, right? We look at your work, which directly engages with that question of spreading global South epistemologies, right? Across the globe, not just in global South contexts, but like thinking about the fact that many of the ways of being that we're now suddenly acting like they're like the newest, latest thing are actually not. They're love letters from our ancestors in the global South. So, I mean, I think that that's where we should be looking for wisdom, is the scholars who are practicing in those spaces, and particularly the scholars whose origins are in those spaces. I don't know. Ryuko, what are you thinking?
Yes, I agree. I mean, we cannot provide wise suggestions because our familiarity is very small, right? So we need to have a contextual understanding of the language, culture, people, and structures and everything in order to be able to provide any suggestions. But at the same time, Global South, so Pinky McCoy and Caroline McKinney's work from South Africa that might resonate some of the issues. And also intersectionality, because, you know, social class and other issues are always very important to look at experiences. I think it's important to avoid essentialism because, you know, being Black doesn't have, you know, a single homogeneous experience, right? So men and women, they have very, very different experiences. So that's where intersectionality comes in, right? And so I introduced Awad Ibrahim's work in 1999 about African refugee background youth coming to Canada and become Black, right? So even though you know, they are Black, they belong to Black race, I guess. You know, depending on where they come from, their experiences are totally different. And then this identities are always shifting and it's not static, right? So by interacting with new environment, new group of people, their identity will shift, right? So I think these are important and complex issues that we need to keep investigating with the caveat that we should avoid essentialism.
Wonderful, Kubota. Thank you, Sue. Thank you.
I wanted to mention that Aparecida Jesus is here, and she says, excellent presentation, Dr. Kubota.
That's exciting.
Yeah, and yes, yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful.
I see that.
So,
Hello,
well,
Sida.
now that my microphone is working, I wanted to thank you both so much for not just your presentations today, but all of the amazing work that you do that's inspiring and enriching for so many of us. And your work is very present here in Brazil, where many of us are thinking about race and racism and how to be anti-racist, and asking those questions, Sue, that you ask in your article about is an anti-racist decolonial pedagogy possible, or applied linguistics possible. After seeing all the questions that you proposed, I would like to share a little about my experience here as a white man from the United States, working as a university professor with language education. And so some of my projects, first of all, I think it's really, you might have already heard that we have a very strong affirmative action program in Brazil, where half of the students who get into public universities come from public schools, and in public schools, most of the students are Black. And so the profile of our students has changed dramatically in the past 20 years. The federal public universities are very elite spaces. They still are, but that has changed dramatically. And so now we are hearing the voices of students from the periphery, or who have been peripherized, I could say, or have been marginalized. And it's very exciting. it's a great opportunity. It's really, of course, there's resistance, but there's a lot of strength in acceptance of the affirmative action programs. And as a leader of the teaching practicum, I have students who are creating English classes focused on Black culture and discussing issues of race and racism. So one of the chapters you mentioned talks about issues of gender, and this semester I have a group that's creating a course on teaching English focused on issues of gender and sexuality. And so there are a lot of exciting things happening. I know that there's a lot of terrible things happening in Brazil and in the world. There's still white settler colonialism happening to this day in Brazil on a scale that's devastating. But I wanted to offer a little bit of hope that there are people who are doing amazing things, young people doing amazing things, young people from very diverse profiles, changing the profile of public universities in Brazil, which you may know are free. Students don't have to pay for anything. So of course there are challenges of keeping students here, and we're trying to increase the number of scholarships and stipends for underprivileged students to continue. So I wanted to just share with you that experience, that there are things happening and a lot of movement happening, and lots of research groups who are interested in the issues you're talking about and using your work to enrich what we do and do a better job.
I'm so happy to hear about that. I really appreciate you sharing.
So I don't think I've seen any other questions in the comments on YouTube. People are thanking you and saying how wonderful it is to be here, and being encouraging and saying let's keep our spirits up. So a few people answered about their profiles, sharing that, for example, Beatriz, our colleague and friend from Piauí, said she is a white Brazilian English teacher who's felt linguistic prejudice in language schools in Sao Paulo and xenophobia in Japan. And these experiences have shaped her as a professor. And Luisa Carvalho mentioned that she is a Black young English teacher in northern Brazil. She's been learning English since she was 11 years old, and mostly in classes they discuss topics relevant to white history and culture, but she tries to teach differently. And those were the two people who responded when we asked for some reflections on talking about who we are. So with that, I believe, Kleber, how are we doing for time?
Well, to conclude our colloquium, I'd like to thank you, Sue and Kubota, for your brilliant presentation. Kubotas know that in Brazil, Kubota, I conducted a kind of fan club of Kubota in Brazil. I'm the leader of Kubota fan club in Brazil, and I organized it. Avram and I organized a kind of fan club of Sue fan club in Brazil. You know, because your research in applied linguistics and critical applied linguistics inspired us. You know, especially me, like a Black researcher in Brazil. Avram knows that to develop research in Brazil is not easy. For Black people, it's more difficult than for another kind of people here. And I'd like to listen you, Sue and Kubota, to say some the final words to conclude our colloquium and the name of our group. Thank you for the great opportunity to interact with you. I'm sure that your research in your books, in your article, inspired us to continue to engage it, a kind of transformation in the language education in our context. Well, thank you, Sue. Thank you, Kubota. And thank you, Avram, for this opportunity to interact with you too.
Thank you to both of you. You both have inspired me also, and very much. And thank you to you too, Ryuko, who has been my mentor for so many decades.
Thank you for supporting me, and thank you for inspiring me. And I always learn from all of you, and all the things that's happening in the world, and our reaction to it. Very, very important. So thank you so much. Muito obrigada.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you so much. And especially thank you, Dr. Kubota, for waking up in the middle of the night at 2 a.m. to be with us. Oh my goodness. It's so
Special applause for you.
Yes.
Thank you, Kubota. Thank you.
You're welcome.
E eu, para finalizar, então, queria mais uma vez agradecer Kubota e Suhantie Motha e Avram pela mediação. E você que está nos acompanhando também agora no YouTube, no próximo mês nós vamos ter um outro colóquio, onde nós vamos discutir um pouquinho sobre a esperança, a pedagogia da esperança. E vamos convidar 2 colegas para debater com a gente o livro deles, e a gente vai interagir com eles também. Então, você que está nos acompanhando vai ser muito bem-vindos, muito bem-vindas. E agradeço mais uma vez Ryuko Kubota e Suhantie Motha e Avram Blum por essa oportunidade singular de aprender com vocês. Muito obrigado.
And especially